The story of Syria's revolution is a tapestry woven from threads of hope, despair, and defiance. It's a story that begins not in the halls of power, but in the hearts of the people. For decades, Syria languished under the iron fist of the Assad regime. Basic freedoms were crushed. Dissent was met with brutal force. The Arab Spring, a wave of pro-democracy uprisings that swept across the Middle East and North Africa, ignited a spark of hope in Syria. In 2011, peaceful protests erupted in the streets, demanding political reforms and an end to corruption. The regime's response was swift and merciless. Security forces opened fire on unarmed protesters. Thousands were arrested, tortured, and disappeared. A brutal crackdown was underway. The regime's brutality only fueled the flames of resistance. What began as peaceful protests transformed into armed rebellion. A nation, once cowed into submission, found its voice. The world watched in horror as Syria descended into a brutal civil war. Neighbor turned against neighbor. Cities were reduced to rubble. Millions were displaced from their homes. The conflict drew in foreign powers, each with its own agenda, further complicating the situation. Amidst the chaos and bloodshed, ordinary Syrians displayed extraordinary courage and resilience. The Syrian civil war was a complex and multifaceted conflict with a dizzying array of actors and shifting alliances. On one side stood the Assad regime, backed by Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah. On the other side was a fragmented opposition, ranging from secular groups to Islamist factions. The conflict took on sectarian dimensions, pitting the ruling Alawite minority against the Sunni majority. Extremist groups such as ISIS exploited the chaos, seizing territory and carrying out horrific atrocities. The international community was divided on how to respond to the crisis. Some countries, like the United States, provided limited support to the opposition, while others, like Russia, intervened militarily on behalf of the regime. Years of relentless fighting took a devastating toll on Syria. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed. Cities were reduced to rubble. The country's infrastructure lay in ruins. The Syrian people, caught in the crossfire, endured unimaginable suffering. As the Syrian civil war raged on, the Assad regime, with the unwavering support of its allies, gradually gained the upper hand. Russian airstrikes pounded rebel-held areas, while Iranian-backed militias fought on the ground. By 2024, the regime had recaptured most of the major cities and towns. The opposition, weakened by infighting and lacking external support, was on the verge of collapse. The final blow came in late 2024, when a coalition of rebel groups, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, launched a desperate offensive against the regime's stronghold of Damascus. The offensive, though initially successful, was ultimately repelled by the regime. With the fall of Damascus, the Assad regime had effectively won the civil war. Bashar al-Assad, once on the brink of being overthrown, had consolidated his grip on power. The victory, however, came at a staggering cost. In a stunning turn of events, the Assad regime, which had clung to power for over a decade, finally crumbled in late 2024. The final offensive was swift and decisive, a testament to the years of simmering resentment and the strategic acumen of the unified opposition. The fall of Damascus, the heart of Assad's power, sent shockwaves throughout Syria and the world. The once impenetrable defenses of the capital city were breached, not by a foreign invasion, but by the Syrian people themselves, rising up to reclaim their nation. The world watched in awe as images of jubilant Syrians celebrating in the streets of Damascus were broadcast across the globe. The fall of the Assad regime marked the end of an era, a turning point in the tumultuous history of Syria. Section 5 echoes on the world stage. The international community reacted to the fall of the Assad regime with a mixture of cautious optimism and deep concern. Western powers, long critical of Assad's brutal rule, expressed hope for a democratic transition in Syria. However, there were also fears that the power vacuum left by the regime's collapse could be filled by extremist groups, particularly in the northern regions where HTS maintained a significant presence. Russia, a staunch ally of the Assad regime, found itself in a precarious position. Having invested heavily in propping up Assad, Moscow now had to navigate a new reality in Syria, one where its influence was diminished. Section 6. The price of freedom. The fall of the Assad regime, while a cause for celebration, also ushered in a period of profound uncertainty and daunting challenges. The country was in ruins, its infrastructure shattered, its economy in shambles, and its social fabric torn apart by years of conflict. Millions of Syrians were displaced, both internally and externally, creating a humanitarian crisis of staggering proportions. The task of rebuilding Syria, both physically and psychologically, was immense. The new leadership, while eager to usher in a new era of peace and democracy, faced the daunting task of unifying a nation riven by years of war and sectarian strife. Section 7. A legacy in ruins. The Assad regime left behind a legacy of brutality, corruption, and human rights abuses that will take generations to heal. The scars of the regime's torture chambers, the mass graves, and the shattered lives of millions of Syrians will forever serve as a reminder of the regime's cruelty. The international community, having witnessed the horrors perpetrated by the Assad regime, had a moral obligation to assist the Syrian people in their efforts to rebuild their lives and their nation. The pursuit of justice for the victims of the regime's crimes was essential, not only for the sake of the victims and their families, but also for the future of Syria. Section 8. Charting a new course. The fall of the Assad regime presented Syria with a unique opportunity to chart a new course, one based on the principles of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. The task was daunting, but not insurmountable. The international community had a responsibility to support the Syrian people in their quest for a better future. This support should include humanitarian aid, economic assistance, and technical expertise to help rebuild the country's shattered infrastructure. Equally important was the need to foster national reconciliation and healing. This required addressing past grievances, promoting dialogue between different communities, and ensuring that all Syrians, regardless of their ethnicity or religion, felt a sense of belonging and ownership in the new Syria. Section 9. At the crossroads of hope and uncertainty. As Syria emerged from the ashes of the Assad regime, it stood at a crossroads, poised between the promise of a brighter future and the lingering shadows of its troubled past. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, but also illuminated by the indomitable spirit of the Syrian people. The world watched with bated breath, hoping that Syria would finally find the peace and prosperity it so richly deserved. The journey would be long and arduous, but the destination, a free and democratic Syria, was worth every sacrifice. The story of Syria's revolution is a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure, to resist, and ultimately to triumph over tyranny. It's a story that continues to unfold, a story that will shape the destiny of Syria and the Middle East for generations to come.